Stay tuned as the doctors examine the case of diabetes. On Call. Funding for On Call television is provided in part by
Avera is a proud sponsor of On Call on South Dakota Public Broadcasting.
Larson Manufacturing is proud to support On Call television as it continues to open doors for important medical information. And by the South Dakota Foundation for Medical Care, the Medicare Quality Improvement Organization for South Dakota. Additional funding is provided by Dakota Care, the Brookings Health System, Dr. Mark Bubach with Dakota Allergy and Asthma, Dakota Dermatology, Aberdeen Asthma and Allergy, the Orthopedic Institute, and Swiftel Communications. Closed captioning for On Call is provided by the generous support of Avera, the Brookings Health System, and Fishback Financial Corporation.
So sweet.
25.8 million people, or 8.3% of the U.S. population, have diabetes. Over 7 million of those are undiagnosed. What is diabetes? Why is the rate of diagnosis increasing? A case of diabetes when the doctors are on call tonight.
Sorry, I can't, this is great. Hello and welcome to On Call Television. Right now in the U.S. there is an epidemic of diabetes. Another number I've heard is 12 million know they have it, and 5 million have it but don't know about it. There's a variety of numbers there, but that's close. That's up by 20% over the last 10 years. We are almost in crisis mode. Tonight we'll be hearing about a dietitian who instructs children at the Boys and Girls Club about diet and exercise. We get to hear about the INCH Project, an online app that will help individuals, hopefully some of you, to socialize their exercise in order to prevent diabetes. And we'll get to meet a young patient who was diagnosed with diabetes at the age of 2 and who will teach us how he manages his diabetes and how he uses insulin injections. We're going to discuss in depth exactly what diabetes is, how it is diagnosed, and what harms it can bring to the individual with this diagnosis. We'll visit ways in which to control it once it happens and what we know about how to prevent it. But most importantly, we will answer your questions about diabetes. Call in with your questions or comments to 1-888-376-6225. You can also submit them to oncalltelevision.com and click on the questions button. To help us discuss diabetes, we are pleased to have our guest and friend Richard Crawford. Dr. Crawford, you're from where now?
So I'm a native of Peoria, Illinois, central Illinois.
So small town, or Peoria is a big town?
Yeah, it's similar to Sioux Falls.
Oh, all
Yeah.
right.
Mm-hmm.
And then where did you go to undergrad?
So I went to Duke University out in North Carolina.
That's a slimy kind of not very big university.
Well, we like our basketball team especially.
Yeah.
Football this year. So.
All right.
Yeah.
So you went to Duke and then med school.
University of Illinois, my home state, up in Chicago.
And then a residency in internal medicine where?
University of Minnesota in Minneapolis. Kind of my first exposure to the upper Midwest.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you did your fellowship in endocrinology.
University of Washington out in Seattle.
Oh, see, I really always wanted to do Washington. I mean, that was my second choice.
Yeah, beautiful state, mountains, water, lots of fun things, and really a great program for diabetes and endocrinology. Yeah.
So and then what did you do?
So then my family's in Illinois, so moved back to Chicago and was in practice at Northwestern University for a number of years.
Did you teach at Northwestern?
I did, I taught the endocrine, the diabetes service, a huge service, got to see, a lot of different patients with, unfortunately, a lot of advanced disease, different problems, the complications.
A lot of the inner
diabetes.
city tough.
Right, and just
case.
really struggles, and things along with all the complications and the challenges in getting medications and being compliant with medications,
Yeah.
trying to find good food in the grocery stores.
When
and,
you don't have money.
Right,
That whole
exactly.
story. And then you taught med students for.
Taught med students,
residents.
right, and residents,
Yeah.
and had them shadow me in the clinic and things like that.
And you did that for how many years?
About 14 years. And then my wife, whose family goes back generations to South Dakota, her ancestors homesteaded around Volga, and then had been in Sioux Falls for 100+ years, brought us back here. So
and Dr. Pei, who's been on this show, of course, before, a dermatologist friend of ours.
yeah, is my father-in-law, right?
Yeah, wow. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
small
great.
world.
Small world.
Yeah,
So you've been here for about a year.
little over a year.
You're doing a lot of teaching at the School of Medicine yet?
Not so much yet, still building up the Avera endocrine group, and I'm fortunate to have 4 other wonderful colleagues, great support staff, dietitians, nurse educators, and we're building the program and kind of focusing on that right now.
That's really great.
Yeah.
Well, let's get right into the question of diabetes. I mean, diabetes is more than just one disease. It's how many diseases, would you say?
Well, it's probably more than we even know. I mean, it's so complex. And first of all, let's just start with the basic definition, which is diabetes is where you have high blood sugar. And it could be due to deficiency of insulin, which is a hormone made in the pancreas. It could be due to resistance to insulin, and then also issues with how the liver processes it, what we call hepatic glucose production. Number of different types of diabetes, the big one, of course, being type 2 diabetes. We used to call it adult onset diabetes. That's where your body's resistant to the insulin, but also you don't make enough. Tends to be in adults, but sadly we're seeing it more in kids now. Obese children, I've seen kids as young as 9 and 10 with adult onset type 2 diabetes.
And that runs with obesity, but it isn't always perfectly from obesity.
Not always from obesity. There are other genetic factors and things. There's these things called MODY type diabetes, which is probably more boring to go into, but sometimes these things don't quite fit in typical patterns.
And then the other major group is
Type 1 diabetes or autoimmune diabetes, where the body attacks the cells that make the insulin in the pancreas and leads to complete loss of insulin. Again, more common in kids.
used to be juvenile.
Juvenile onset, but we know now you can be a 75-year-old who develops type 1. I had a patient who had rheumatoid arthritis, and she was on pills, and after about a couple of years just did horribly, and she needed 4 or 5 shots of insulin, and she's like, why is my diabetes like this? I have adult onset, and we did some special blood tests, and lo and behold, she was a late onset type 1 diabetic and was more like what kids go through.
What blood test do you do to define type 1, there versus type 2?
The typical easy ones to do are something called a fasting C-peptide, which measures the amount of native insulin production your body makes. It'll differentiate if you're on shots, for example. So if the C-peptide is very low, with a normal sugar, the patient's not making much in terms of insulin. The other test is what's called a glutamic acid decarboxylase antibody, and this is a blood test which, if it's more the early ones, sometimes there's later ones, anti-islet cell antibodies, et cetera, but this one often will pick it up when you suspect someone who it could be type 1 diabetic. For example, needing a lot of insulin right away, very thin, no family members with diabetes. That'd be someone, especially in an adult, I might be clued in. Maybe they have late onset type 1 diabetes.
And so you're measuring an antibody where your body has developed an anti-pancreas.
It's rejection. It's attacking your body. It's killing off those cells that are making the insulin. And what we're hoping is to get better ways to stop that process. And there's some exciting medications that they're working on. Right now, there's nothing we can do yet to prevent type 1 diabetes, so it's just a matter of treating it, but that would be the ideal way to do that.
Now that's really new stuff over the last 10 years where you have a child who's comes down with it. It's obviously type 1 diabetes, no pancreas
Right.
working, and they have developed a way to stop that pancreas from being destroyed.
Correct.
And so that's all right now experimental.
It's experimental. There are some drugs that are promising, and I think the whole world of, for example, rheumatology is finding new anti-rejection medications, things that modulate the immune system, and there have been some published papers, but everything is still very experimental.
Methotrexate has been used, I know, for so much in rheumatology. Have they used that in diabetes type 1?
You know, they've tried that probably a long time ago, more disappointing. There's some other agents with far fewer side effects that may be more promising.
And the biologics, the new fabulous drugs for rheumatology that we don't need every time with rheumatoid, maybe 40% of the time, have they been used or tried?
Some of those are kind of in that class that they're using.
And one more question about cause before we get into some questions. We've got questions. I really appreciate these questions. The question of which diabetes is most inherited. Is it type 1 that's most inherited, the juvenile onset kind, or is it type 2, the adult onset that's associated with obesity? Which one is most inherited?
They both have hereditary components, but type 2 is actually far more common to have. For example, if you have an identical twin, you share the same genes, one twin only has about a 50% chance of developing type 1 diabetic, becoming a type 1 diabetic if they're other twins. So clearly there's some environmental factor, and people have postulated certain viruses could be triggers, something called hand, foot, and mouth disease. This Coxsackie virus may be a thing. Some people thought maybe cow's milk. There's various things it's not just the genes, but you need something else. Unfortunately, type 2 diabetes is much more strongly inherited, and while things such as lifestyle, weight, diet, etc., exercise are important, it's much more strongly inherited.
Well, we appreciate your questions. 1-888-376-6225. Get them in early. We appreciate it. We have a call from Sioux Falls. Is there an association with pancreatic cancer and diabetes? Pancreatic cancer.
We do know that there is a somewhat increased risk for pancreatic cancer and for diabetes mellitus type 2 with that. And this issue can come up with some certain medications that are out there now, some of these newer so-called incretin medications, where is there some concern of pancreatic cancer risk with these? And these include some of the injectables and some of the oral
the
agents.
Victoza, the Byetta, the Bydureon.
Correct, and then like the Januvia, the Tradjenta, Onglyza, and
that's all theoretical though, not been proven.
All theoretical, not been proven, and some of the points that are made are, yes, there is perhaps a higher risk, but also if you're diabetic, you do have a slightly higher risk of pancreatic cancer.
But it might well be that the pancreatic cancer is there and it's killing the pancreas, and then the diabetes comes on.
Exactly.
So it's the pancreatic cancer that caused it, not...
Right, which is the cart and which is the horse, basically.
Right. That's a great question.
Yeah.
There's another question from Sioux Falls. Is there association with fructose diet and diabetes? That's the big thing. Everybody's talking about fructose and different kinds of sugars. Some are more dangerous for a diabetic or not. What's that question?
Well, and a lot of this arises from the fact that we've seen such an explosion, as you mentioned earlier, in diabetes over the last 30, 40 years. And some people postulated one of the risks is high fructose corn syrup, that maybe with that
corn
somehow...
syrup is the big culprit.
Right, that's a big issue. And I don't think it's actually been proven that that's the case. And some people actually say there are other sugars that have a higher effect, if you will, a glycemic index effect than fructose does. I think it's just that we're eating too much sugar, we're not exercising, our diets aren't as good. Those are probably more important than actually the type of sugar source.
So
that
people
we're getting.
really like to simplify things and blame something, and it's all that cheap corn syrup that's brought this on. But I think it has, in one sense, because it's the sugar they use with all these sugary drinks.
Right. It's all these sugary drinks, and just, I believe like a can of Coke, for example, is 29 or 39 grams of carbohydrates, which if you're a diabetic and you're counting those, that's basically more than half your allowance.
Your daily allowance.
Or mealtime allowance, and not only that, but because it's such a rapid, it hits the body so rapidly, the body can't process it, and you're going to have more problems with that.
Right. We'll talk about diet more. I mean, this is going to be a fun diet thing. We'll learn more about that, but we'll be back to it in a bit. The Let's Go 5210 program instructs and encourages young children, older children, and their parents in ways to lead a healthy lifestyle. They learn what a healthy diet is, why exercise is important, and how to set goals.
The Let's Go 5210 program is currently funded by the Brookings Health System Foundation, and it's a program that I've been doing through the health system for the past, I think we're going on 4 years now. And the program is multifaceted, meaning that I have a interactive program with children and families in various different settings throughout the last 4 years. And then I also offer one-on-one education with children or parents or young adult children that might need some help, a little bit more one-on-one discussion about what their healthy lifestyle, weight management problems, healthy eating, goal setting, and just taking care of themselves in general. This year we've brought it to the Boys and Girls Club, and we've done it here as kind of a club thing with the children in the late afternoon, early evenings. We talk about 5 servings of fruits and vegetables every day, and we really talk to the kids about what counts as a serving, how can we get those fruits and vegetables into our daily lifestyle. We talk about the 2, which is 2 hours or less of recreational screen time. So including TV time, computer use, video games, all of those things included. We talk about 1, which is 1 hour or more of physical activity every day. And we try to teach the kids different ways, such as going on imaginary hikes, to teach them that you don't have to just go outside and play. You can do that inside your home or as a family. It's not just the children that need the exercise. Mom and dads need to get going too. And then we talk about 0, which is 0 sugar sweetened beverages. And so with that, I encourage the kids to make sure they're getting plenty of milk and water throughout the day and less of the sugar sweetened stuff. So the Blizzard players came on exercise night twice, they did. And they came and helped us do exercises with the children. They talked about how much exercise they do every day. They talked about the importance of exercise. They showed us some of the stretches and some of the different things that they do. And then they also helped us lead the kids in different exercises. And they also received a small tracker to help them track each day how many servings of healthy beverages they were taking. We also talked about track your physical activity throughout the day. Mark a little box for each half hour of physical activity. And they did pretty good. For each tracker that they brought back, they received a small prize. And then also I told them if they did very well throughout the course of the class, we would have a celebration at the Brookings Blizzard game coming up. So learning these concepts now obviously is going to help the children make those healthy lifestyles and healthy habits now. The earlier they make it, and the earlier they make it just a general part of their everyday life, the more they're going to encourage their parents to implement it in their homes, and the more it's just going to be the norm and the usual for them.
Wasn't that great? I loved the Blizzard kids, the hockey players bringing in the energy to the little kids. I mean, that's what...
And emphasizing exercise and keeping active. And there have been reports that if you can do 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week of just moderate exercise, even just a good brisk walk, you don't have to necessarily break your back on a treadmill or something like that, but even if you could do that 5 days a week, you can really help prevent progression of loss of insulin function and needing more medications for the diabetes.
People blame me for overdoing the exercise thing. I'm not to blame. It's just the truth. Here's another person who says this.
And I agree. I think diet and exercise are always the foundation of treating diabetes. We're fortunate to have many of these new medications, the new injectables, the oral agents. I mean, when I was in medical school, we had one type of diabetes pill, probably yourself, the sulfonylureas, glyburide, et cetera. And metformin came out, and now we've got the DPP-4 inhibitors like Januvia. We've got the incretins like Victoza. We've got the this new one out, Invokana, canagliflozin, a whole host of different medications that each are, I think, important, but on a foundation of good diet and exercise.
Yeah, bingo. I thought the neat thing about the 5210 thing is to emphasize 0 sugary drinks. Now, fruit juice?
Fruit juice can pack a punch, and it's not necessarily all fruit. I would much rather eat a piece of fruit. Far more healthy, the antioxidants, less sugar in there, but the fruit juice oftentimes is supplemented with sugar, with fructose, and doesn't have the same benefit.
Well, and then they've shown that juice in the gut doesn't tell you that you should be satisfied.
Right, and the quantity, so you end up getting more, and you're overwhelming the system that way.
Yeah, I used to drink a regular amount of fruit juice. I am drinking no fruit juice.
Water is the best drink.
Yeah.
That really is the best.
Well, coffee's pretty close.
Coffee's pretty good. And actually there's some antioxidant
Yeah.
and perhaps some benefit even with coffee and tea in moderation.
Join our conversation and call in your questions and comments about tonight's topic. 1-888-376-6225 or email them on questions@oncalltelevision.com. So, and this makes it better. We'd like to have your questions. I do have a question from Flandreau. Is diabetes a sex-linked trait? In my family, only the males are getting diabetes. Have you ever heard that one?
I haven't heard that. You know, there's some idea whether for children of type 1 diabetics, whether there's maybe a higher risk if your mother was type 1 or is type 1 diabetic versus your father. But in general, that's not a huge component.
I will say this, though, that when women are overweight, they often are shaped like pears. So they have big bottoms and big thighs and thinner abdomens. And men have apples. They got this big gut, and so women are pears, men are apples. That's a generalization.
And the apple is worse. The apple is what we call central adiposity or visceral fat. Getting it in your abdomen is a risk factor for not only diabetes, but cholesterol problems, high blood pressure, and ultimately heart disease. And heart disease is the single biggest killer of diabetics. It's going to account for 70 to 80%. And you know, we don't really know if these medicines and getting the diabetes under control helps protect against heart disease. We know it helps protect against blindness, kidney failure, amputations, etc. But again, good diet and exercise. Also getting your blood pressure under control with medications if needed, getting the cholesterol down. You have to really attack everything, and that prevents problems.
So it's interesting. The apples are much more dangerous than the pears. And what's more, the apples are more easily weight lost. The guys can actually lose this belly, where women who are shaped like pears, you know, you have to make them deathly ill before they'll lose that weight.
But again, it's not as big of a risk factor. So I'd say that's more about just are you happy how you look and still exercise, but it's not as unhealthy.
There you go. It's not as unhealthy.
Yeah.
But the belly, the Dunlap disease, where it laps right over that belly, that Dunlap over the belt, that's a risk factor.
And women, as they age and go through menopause, they oftentimes will shift from the pear to the apple and have the higher risk at that point.
It brings on the higher risk.
Yeah.
We've got a question from Sioux Falls. What are the symptoms of diabetes? Well, let's shift. I mean, we've talked about doing some things, and I love this comment that Katy did, and what a great job she did. And isn't it great that she's at the Boys and Girls Club doing this thing and teaching kids to be active? We all need to do that. But let's shift to a person who might be having diabetes, but they don't know. Now, what would person be doing?
Well, sometimes they might not have any symptoms, and we'll get back to that. But typical symptoms, if the sugars get high, are more thirst, more urination, blurred vision, unexplained fatigue, particularly in women, more yeast infections, sometimes tingling and numbness, just not feeling well. Those would be your typical symptoms, especially more gradual onset. For type 1 diabetes, it might be a child who's very thirsty, urinating a lot, and a lot of weight loss. So unexplained weight loss, both for children and adults, should always be a clue or a concern.
And when you have all of a sudden a loss of your own insulin, what happens is your body tries to fix it, and the result is that you develop acidosis. And so the great story, one of my physician teachers, and here I am, a freshman in med school, I don't know a thing, right? So Eberhard Heinrichs, the great internist from Watertown, a pediatrician from Watertown, said to me, okay, Rick, I want you to go down to the front a desk at the hospital, a lady's going to come in and she's going to be acting funny. I want you to examine what's going on, look at her, and then tell me what you think she's got. And I went down and she comes in out of breath, just breathing like crazy, short of breath, short of breath. I mean, it was a lesson I'll never forget because she was acidotic. Her body was trying to blow off the acid. The acid was from blood sugar being too high.
And you could smell probably like a fruity breath.
There's a fruity breath.
Very,
So here I am, a junior medical student at Emory, and my teacher is giving me a oral quiz.
Right.
And he says, this lady comes into the hospital really short of breath. I nailed it. I had, of course, it could be lung disease, it could be heart failure, but it could be pneumonia, but got to think about diabetic ketoacidosis. Bingo, I won. I passed the exam.
There you go. Good.
Very important issue. Other symptoms that we need to talk about?
Sometimes if it is more advanced, it might be where again problems with not healing infections on the feet, for example. In men, sometimes erectile dysfunction could be a clue, especially if they haven't been regularly to the doctor. Those are
the two major reasons why men have erectile dysfunction is what?
I would probably guess diabetes is going to be one, and cardiovascular hypertension, that type of thing.
Cigarettes.
And cigarettes too, right?
There you go.
As a complication.
Is diabetes on the rise?
It is on the rise. In fact, it's gone up from about 2 to 4% to about, as I said, about 8.2% of the population in the last 30 years for type 2 diabetes.
It went from 2.4 to 8?
Correct, right, and it's going to rise again. We think eventually as many as 25% someday may have diabetes. Even type 1 diabetes is increasing. We're not quite clear why that is.
But we think mostly it's because of obesity?
For type 2. For type 1, we're not as sure. We're not as sure. Some people have postulated, just like with other allergies, you see kids now with peanut allergies. We never saw that when I was a kid. You see people with more asthma, that maybe our environment's too clean. Sometimes having a little bit more dirt, a few more parasites might protect against these autoimmune things, perhaps against type 1 diabetes as well. But type 1 is rising about 3% per year over the last 20, 30 years. But type 2 is the one that's really exploding, and that's the one that is a huge issue.
All right. Staying regularly active benefits our health in so many ways, but finding that motivation to keep on a regular exercise routine can be difficult. Here's a program known as the INCH Project that encourages exercise together in a team, so you have that accountability to persevere.
INCH stands for Initiative for New Culture of Health, and what we're trying to do is establish a new culture of health where people began having a sustaining lifestyle change. Currently, a lot of people will want to try new dieting and exercise habits, but they don't last. And so what we're trying to do is figure out a way how we can get everybody on board, kind of create this new environment, a supportive environment that encourages people to continue to make their life changes. It's not just something you decide to change once and then it's done. It's a continual lifestyle.
When we begin just in Brookings here, people can sign up for it and they can form their own groups of anywhere from size 2 to 8, or if they need us to, we can just randomly assign them to a group, preferably like in the company that they work at or whatever they would prefer. And then they just are required to work out 3 times a week for 30 minutes, just be active, and also be social for an hour and a half, because that socializing is a positive reinforcer for the hard work you're putting in for the activity. And the hope is with this being a 6-month program, that at the end, it's just become a habit that you can continue to do it on your own, or you can continue to do it as in a group if you would prefer.
We're trying to develop ways we can monitor change in health of the participants, and one of those ways is to measure glycemic hemoglobin levels. You can measure glucose levels or the blood sugar levels. Unfortunately, though, that really fluctuates throughout the day, and it's just depends on if you've eaten or not eaten. And so measuring these glycemic hemoglobin levels is a little bit better indicator of individuals who have a harder time maintaining their blood sugar levels. we would have to have a health screening and a health professional to have to take their blood and be able to do a test on it.
But they will be able to see the data on the website. Like, it will be put into a secure database that only they can see. We want to see compliance, the compliance rate, like the number of weeks that people successfully were active. Secondly, we want to look at the dropout rate, how many people actually completed the entire thing. And using those two, we'll then go back and go, well, this group had a higher success rate than the other group. Now, what was the reason for that? And we're having them take various personality surveys as well as an emotional intelligence survey. And afterwards, see, was there a certain group composition that led to a higher rate of success? Because if that's the case, you could mix and match groups later on that maximizes the number of successful groups.
Really how this will be effective is if it's not the individual themselves that have to hold themselves accountable. It's more that they have to rely on their group members. Everybody as a team that holds each other accountable.
Now, those two gentlemen are self-actuators. You know, they're the ones that start an idea. They got a great idea. They're looking at putting personalities together. So go to oncalltelevision.com and you can connect to one of those sites where the Inch Project is working. So you can get involved. We'd love for people to do this. And if you'd like to call in your questions, call 1-888-376-6225 or go to the internet On Call Television and push on the questions button. And while you're at it, look at the Inch Project. And we appreciate the calls. Keep them coming, please. We have a call from Pierre. How good is having glycemic index as a tool for diet with diabetes? You know, the glycemic index.
Right,
What is the glycemic?
So that's basically that when you have a certain food which contains carbohydrates or sugars, what will it do in terms of raising the sugar afterwards? And so certain foods like simple sugars have a far higher glycemic index than, for example, whole wheat bread or complex carbs or something like that. And so the thought is that when you have something with a lower glycemic index, the body doesn't have to work as hard to process it, the medicines will work more effectively, and you spend less time in high sugar and hyperglycemia. And so it's felt to be one of the important things, and I think on that note, we always say try to get plenty of fiber, has very low glycemic index. Try to get more vegetables that again, fiber in it and not necessarily high glycemic index. Things like nuts and beans and things, very low carb, not much in the terms of glycemic index, but yeah, you got to mix and match. So
Sure.
I'm still always tell my patients, you don't have to absolutely give up everything except maybe the sugared soda, you know, but along other things, it's always knowing how to mix and match, and maybe thinking in terms of glycemic index is one of the useful tools for that.
It's always interesting to me to look at the index of different foods, and the highest index is the fastest to put the sugars way up in your body is white bread.
Right.
And a baked potato and molasses. Isn't that interesting? And one of the lowest is orange juice or proteins. And the other thing you said that I thought was interesting to highlight was mixed nuts. Recent data said that there's like some 20% reduction in mortality rate. Now it's one study, and
Right.
and it was done by the nut company.
Right.
But it showed a tremendous benefit of a mixed nuts, because it's really kind of the diet that our great ancestors lived and survived on.
Well, and some people think that that's the case, that we should be getting back to that type of diet.
What do
And
you
again,
think?
I'm sort of a realist, that I think some of what we have, we can't completely get back to the caveman diet, but I think trying to get back to more of that is a good thing.
Well, what would be an example of what you think is the ideal diet, or moving toward the caveman diet? Less carbs, or less quick, simple carbs, right?
So I think a lot of it that they touched upon is getting things like whole grain breads, if you're going to have any bread whatsoever, getting things like beans, legumes, things like lean meats. So fish, we should all be eating more fish. Fish is wonderful. poultry without the skin, try to cut down a little bit on the red meat, less servings of that, and still getting your fruits and vegetables. Fruits aren't entirely bad. Certain fruits I think are better. I think the berries, like blueberries, raspberries, probably better choice than a melon or a pineapple in terms of sugar. And remember that a lot of the fruits, apples, berries are loaded in antioxidants. And one of the concerns about being diabetic is you're at this what's called higher oxidant stress. It's like the body rusts. These are anti-rust agents, and they kind of help keep those arteries open, keep them from clogging up, and a better thing.
Yeah, I kind of, and my counter to the antioxidant is the biggest oxidant is too much food.
Right.
It's the food load. It's the and
all that sugar's hanging around longer, having time to rust your body.
Yeah, the rusting your body. The hemoglobin A1C is a measurement of the rusting.
Right.
I do like the idea of counting calories, and if I've got two patients of mine, friends of mine, who have reduced their weight by 30, 40, 50, 60 pounds over a 6-month period of time by basically arduously counting calories, and it's worked.
Right. It's a lot of work to do it, but there are a lot of apps on smartphones which make it easier, that give you certain foods and tell you how many calories are in there. Something called MyFitnessPal. A lot of my patients use.
Oh, really? MyFitnessPal?
MyFitnessPal. And it not only has nutritional things, but exercise things. And it's an app you can get for your smartphone, and it can be very helpful.
Here is a call from Sioux Falls. Many sugar-free foods like sorbitol, is that a good substitute, or does it raise blood sugar levels? Sorbitol isn't well absorbed.
Well, they're not well absorbed. So things like sugar alcohols do have a small amount. Let's say, for example, for your gram of sugar, it might be 4 calories. Some of these sugar alcohols, it might be 2. So they're kind of 50%. But you also have to be careful, or a lot of people have to be careful with things like sorbitol, because they don't get absorbed. What happens? Well, they ferment in your gut. And I have patients come to me and say, I went on a sugar-free kick and now I've got diarrhea and I'm bloating and am I dying or what's going on? Tell me what you're eating. Oh, you're eating all that sugar-free sorbitol. Cut it out.
That'll give you diarrhea. Caller's son-in-law has diabetes. He fasts 1 day a week. Is there a healthy thing about doing fasting? What do you think about fasting in general or for a diet?
Well, if you're doing it for religious purposes, or sometimes sometimes we'll have patients fast so that we can figure out what we call their basal insulin needs. So there are sort of supervised and reasons for doing that. In general, though, I'm much more in favor of being consistent and eating square meals at consistent times, doing snacks. If you're eating snacks at consistent times, it actually makes it easier in the long run.
I think that if they're on medications that can cause sugars to go low, like insulin or like the old glyburide,
be very dangerous.
Dangerous to fast.
Right.
On the other hand, many of the new agents, and metformin included, will not give you low sugars.
Exactly right. It's really just the secretagogues like the glyburide, the glipizide, the insulins. Those are the ones. Amaryl, correct.
Okay. Caller lost 100 pounds, got his hemoglobin A1C to 5.2. Weight loss caused loose skin on legs, which rubbed together and caused sores. Because she can exercise, her weight and A1C are back up. What can she do to get around this leg problem? Wow, that's an interesting story.
That's a challenge, and sometimes with weight loss, you get extra skin, and
you can have plastic surgery on that extra skin, and I really think that's an important issue. Certainly, support hose is a very important thing with legs in particular. And so and then the weight's back. That's the major problem.
It's a big challenge to keep it off, and even patients that have had gastric bypasses sometimes will put on weight again. And the body, it's like a thermostat, like where it wants to be. It's not where you want it to be, but it's never giving up on the exercise. And I think the caller had indicated when she couldn't do the exercise, that was probably a bigger factor than even perhaps the diet.
The biggest problem.
Yeah.
Austin Taylor is a 13-year-old boy and has had diabetes since he was 2. It takes discipline to manage diabetes, and Austin has managed a plan specific to his needs that he follows while at school and at home.
This is like my meter here, and I got all my shots in here. If I'm like at school or something, I keep it in my homeroom, And if I get low, I just like go in there and check it. This one is the long-acting one, and this one is the one I do like after every meal and after every snack. I like eat when I'm hungry, then I write down how many carbs I have, and then we figure it out like that. The school has like a menu, and it tells us all the stuff, all the foods and how many carbs I have. We have like a ratio when I go to school. Sometimes it's like 1 to 12 or 1 to 17. And that means every like 17 grams I eat, I get 1 unit of insulin.
Yeah, he has a little help from mom and dad with that. We help him with his lunch menu. The school posts online the lunch, and we can go online and view the carbs. So we help him out with that part as much as we can. So then the ratio could change day to day depending on what activity, if he has gym or no gym or gets out of school earlier, his ratio could change. So we help him out with that, and then he just writes down what he actually eats, and when he goes to the nurse's station, he adds that all up and divides it by his ratio, and that's how much insulin he'll get. The thing that I wanted to bring up with Austin is your diabetes at school. What's your game plan at school? Are you ever left alone if you feel low?
No. Usually if I'm low like before lunch, I have my cousin that's in the same grade as me, and we just go to like the front of the lunch line and we get our food right away if I'm like low.
Yeah, Jack is his name. We've designated a medical buddy at school for Austin. Like if he stated earlier that his medical bag is always left in his homeroom, so if he's in another classroom and he feels low, his medical buddy will come with him to the homeroom. He's never to walk the hallways by himself when he's low.
Sometimes if I'm like really want a snack or something, I will do my blood sugar. Then if I'm higher, I'll still eat it, but then I just get some insulin before every meal and then before every snack too. And I usually have like 1 or 2 snacks a day, is it? Before lunch, I give it in my stomach, but then like for breakfast and after supper, I give it like back here in my arms. I try to do one side one day, then the other side the next day.
Join our conversation and call in your questions or comments to 1-888-376-6225 or email them to oncalltelevision.com. So there's an interesting story about Austin. Richard.
It was a good illustration of kind of the different types of insulin. Some people have questions, and we have an idea of what we call basal insulin, which is that background insulin that you need whether you're eating or not, and then the prandial or bolus insulin, which is what you would take for meals. And he was doing it in a very sophisticated way that we ultimately try to encourage a lot of our patients to learn, which is to do that amount of insulin based upon carb counting. So he's counting the amount of carbohydrates, and then he's got a ratio like 1 to 17, and that tells him how much it takes to cover that amount of carbs. And I think even for type 2 diabetics or people that are maybe not on quite as of a complex regimen, it's a good thing to do because it kind of, again, keeps them in line for what they're doing for their diet and watching choices and saying, oh, that has a lot of carbs. Do I really want to add that to my regimen? Certainly those type of tools that he's using are also important if someone were to go on an insulin pump, for example, because the pump really depends upon having carb counting, entering that data in, and then having different basal rates depending on your activity at different times of the day.
So it's interesting. This is called pretty tight control.
Right, intensive control or tight control, right. And studies have shown it makes a difference. When they did a study with type 1 diabetics, getting their A1C down from a 9.2 to even a 7.2 had dramatic reductions in the complications.
Tell us what a hemoglobin A1C is.
So think of it like your 3-month report card. It's sort of like what your average sugar is of every minute of every day for 3 months. And a non-diabetic would have an A1C of about 4.5 to about 5.6 or so, different ranges in different labs. For diabetes, we know that once it gets above 6.5, you are at a little bit higher risk of those microvascular complications, the eye damage, the kidney. The ADA says keep it under 7, but you have to individualize it. Some of my patients who are 90 years old and maybe have heart disease and might fall, I don't want to put them on a lot of insulin and have them have a reaction. So I might want their A1C to maybe 7.5. So you can use them as guidelines, but there are other factors that
I
are
mean, there's some
important.
data that say that you get too low in a diabetic that you're controlling, and they'll have more
problems.
death, more
Right,
morbidity.
right.
It's a J curve.
Right,
you know.
right. So you have to individualize it.
So it's important, though. 7 is kind of the gold
Right.
where we're setting. And now this one says, talk about control. How close do you have to be? And my concern is that when anybody gets low, too low, now you correct me if I'm wrong, their counter-regulatory mechanisms kick in. I mean, their adrenaline and their growth hormone and a variety of things to save the brain, because if it gets too low, the brain burns. So it kicks in to save and protect you. And the result is that you've got this out-of-whack situation for a day or 2 or 3, and you may have problems thinking that now your sugars are too high.
You rebound. You have the rebound, the yo-yoing. The other thing is over time, if you continuously run yourself too low, you can develop what's called hypoglycemic unawareness, where before you might feel it at a 60, now you may not feel it at a 20. Those are individuals that are danger for coma or death, and so you got to weigh a lot of things.
Okay, so fast answers because I've babbled too long. And can walking around the grocery store at Walmart count towards exercising if it's for a half an hour?
Absolutely.
I love that.
Yeah.
You can, in fact, if you go around the inside of our Walmart 4 times, it's a mile. Here is a question. I had gestational diabetes requiring insulin 28 years ago. I'm in my mid-50s, active, healthy, normal weight. What chances of diabetes coming back? Gestational diabetes is?
Well, they typically say if you have gestational diabetes, there's 30 to 50% risk, but for 28 years, she's probably has better odds.
And gestational meaning?
Diabetes in pregnancy. That goes with pregnancy.
She got diabetes when she was pregnant. It went away after her baby. She's not had a problem since.
Right, and she's active, hopefully keeping the weight down. The risk, that reduces the risk.
That's great. But there is a higher percentage of that.
Correct, yes.
Here's from Sioux Falls. Caller eats ice cream daily. Is it dangerous?
Well, there's a lot of calories in there, and sometimes I'll say you don't have to give it up, but how much? How big is that bowl? Sometimes just a little spoonful with something else would be a good choice.
I'd go with the fresh fruits.
Right.
Fresh fruits and vegetables.
Yeah.
What is your opinion of aspartame?
One of the sugar substitutes. I would say it's certainly not going to raise the blood sugars. Some people think it causes headaches and other problems. I know there was some concern about what it does to memory. I don't think any of those studies are really clear-cut. I just say everything in moderation, and I'm not opposed to using it.
I personally think that it's a lot of hype, and somebody is getting money or press saying it's bad,
Right.
read my column.
I think it's okay. I'd much rather you have a diet soft drink that has aspartame than go for the sugared beverage.
But the studies show that if you're drinking this many non-sugared beverages versus this many, it's the same. I mean, people don't really lose weight on those.
Oh yeah, you won't lose weight, but in terms of like sugar control, it makes a difference. Yeah.
From Pierre, caller is diagnosed with diabetes 3 months ago. She eats well, walks daily. What kind of progression should she expect at her age? 64.
Well, diabetes does progress, and there's no doubt about it. We don't really know what can halt that progression, but you're on the right step. Keep checking it. Typically, without intervention, the A1C would naturally go up about 1 point every couple of years. So over time, it probably will require more medication but the diet and exercise and keeping the weight down will slow that process, hopefully.
How accurate is hemoglobin A1C? I think it's very accurate.
There are instances, though, where it can, for example, high cell turnover. If you've just had a blood transfusion, it's not going to be accurate. If you've lost a lot of blood, certain people that have sickle cell anemia. So it's
dependent upon the turnover of your blood. Most of us, 3 months, we turn over all our blood. But some people have different kinds of turnovers.
Different turnovers.
So it'll change.
So you do have to take those into consideration.
This caller, and we've got just a few minutes, talked about Victoza. Now there's two injectable new drugs that are.
There's Byetta, Victoza, Bydureon, all good choices. Again, I touched upon earlier, there's some controversy, nothing that's been shown conclusively for being, I certainly use it in my practice. You weigh the risk versus the benefits of every medication. If you do get belly pain, stop it, don't take it.
All right, we'll be back right after this.
The flu bug is getting ready for another season. Are you? Get vaccinated, because stopping the flu starts with you.
In 1735, John Wesley visited Savannah in the province of Georgia in the American colonies and gave an account of the American Indians as the perfect example of health. He described this as mostly due to their lean diet, their rigorous physical lifestyle. It's now nearing 300 years later, and people of all races could learn from the habits of the early American Indians. What has happened since has deeply affected not only the American Indian, but also the white and multi-ethnic settlers of this country. As advancements in technology has taken away the need for hard daily work to survive, the American public has become lazy, letting the wheels and the motors do the walking. Especially over the last 25 years, we've become a country of Game Boy couch potato TV watchers who drive to school and work always looking for an easy way. At the same time, diets have changed with the availability of inexpensive oil, flour, syrup, and cheese. This made fry bread, pizza, donuts, cheesy potatoes, and sugary drinks the dietary staple, rather than the lean meat, fruits, vegetables, roots, fungi, and legumes, which were the traditional American Indian and Native Alaskan diet. With all these too easy and greasy, sugary ways comes an epidemic of obesity, with 2 out of 3 Americans overweight, and half of these, frankly, obese. No surprise, an epidemic of diabetes has followed. Right now, 12 million Americans know they have diabetes, and about 5 million more have it but don't know it. Paradoxically, obesity and type 2 diabetes is about twice as bad in the American Indian population, who in the 1700s were looked upon as the epitome of health. So how can we change this trend in not only the American Indian population, but in all the rest of those European, Middle Eastern, Asian, African, Mexican, and South American immigrant populations that make up this admixture we call America? It certainly will not come from developing and prescribing more medicine. One study from Bosnia-Herzegovina showed educating children and parents about diabetes made the biggest difference. This spreading of education must come not only from economists, politicians, educators, and medical care providers, but especially from local community leaders and elders working together to bring on a leaner diet and more rigorous physical lifestyle. We could all learn from the habits of the early American Indians. Rich, your comments about our Native American cousins.
Well, you mentioned 1700s. It's actually even more recent than that. 1940s, it was almost unknown. Then it started in the 60s and 70s. By the 80s and beyond, it's become just rampant. It's 16.1%, but in the Pima Indians, it's up to 30%. It's growing across the board. And I think finding support groups, finding community leaders that are involved in this. I know the ADA has a program called Awakening the Spirit for Native Americans. I know that regardless of your community, getting together with friends to exercise, work on diet, get the education, work with your nurses, your doctors, your educators, get the information out there and try to make it a goal. And like you say, we are getting more medicines. Hopefully someday we'll have a cure. We don't have it now. We gotta have it where you do diet and lifestyle.
30 seconds. Caller's grandson is 10. He's developed diabetes at 3. What's his outlook for a cure?
Probably better for type 1 than type 2. I think.
This guy, yeah.
Yes.
And we may have a cure. We may inject some cells in his liver, and boom, we're
and figure out how the body won't reject him. And so I think it's very promising, particularly type 1 diabetes.
Well, that brings us to the end of our show this evening. I sincerely thank you, Dr. Richard Crawford, our guest and friend, for helping to answer all the insightful questions from our audience tonight. Even back in the 5th century BC, the physician Hippocrates knew if we could give every individual the right amount of nourishment and exercise, not too little and not too much, we would have found the safest way to perfect health. Until next time, stay healthy out there, people.
Funding for On-Call television is provided in part by
Avera is a proud sponsor of On Call on South Dakota Public Broadcasting.
Larson Manufacturing is proud to support On-Call television as it continues to open doors for important medical information.
and by the South Dakota Foundation for Medical Care, the Medicare Quality Improvement Organization for South Dakota. Additional funding is provided by Dakota Care, the Brookings Health System, Dr. Mark Bubak with Dakota Allergy and Asthma, Dakota Dermatology, Aberdeen Asthma and Allergy, the Orthopedic Institute, and Swiftel Communications. Closed caption for On Call is provided by the generous support of Avera, the Brookings Health System, and Fishback Financial Corporation.